We're at war with a bunch of savages. The monsters who call themselves the Islamic State delivered their message to America, and it came in the form of a severed head. That band of blood-loving butchers released a video showing them decapitating an American journalist, and they threatened to behead another unless Obama ends the military operations in Iraq.
A growing number of political and religious leaders around the world are calling for action against the Islamic radicals in Iraq. Charlene Aaron has the story.
This chilling video, released late Tuesday, appears to show the 40-year-old American photojournalist James Foley on his knees with his executioner next to him, holding a knife in his left hand. Foley was a seasoned foreign correspondent on assignment for the Global Post when he disappeared in northern Syria. His murder is retaliation for U.S. airstrikes that have stopped the ISIS advance in northern Iraq. It's the latest outrage from the soldiers of the Islamic State.
This is a tragedy which is beyond imagining. There are no words to describe this kind of inhumanity.
Lawmakers in Washington say ISIS is capable of carrying out an attack on U.S. soil and warn that the president must deal with the militants now.
ISIS' method of diplomacy are beheadings, crucifixions, mass executions, or live burials, and enslavement of women and forced marriages. These are evil people. They need to be defeated.
Across the globe, opposition to ISIS is growing. In Germany, thousands of Kurds, Yazidis, and others took to the streets of Hanover, calling on the international community to intervene. Religious leaders are speaking out too. On Monday, the Pope gave his blessing to military action to stop the terrorist group. Patriarchs in Lebanon are also calling for action to stop the persecution of Christians displaced in Iraq. Even Muslim leaders are slamming the actions of ISIS. Saudi Arabia's top cleric says the group is Islam's #1 enemy, and representatives of several Muslim organizations call the radical group a monster. Meanwhile, a group of religious scholars here in the U.S. are calling for the destruction of ISIS. The online petition signed by Reverend Russell Moore of the Southern Baptist Convention and others says none of us glorifies war, but warns that nothing less can stop the Islamic militants' campaign of genocide against religious minorities and unconscionable acts of barbarism against defenseless women and children. Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
Well, that's a courageous statement from religious leaders, and with us now is one of the signers of that statement calling for the destruction of the Islamic State. Professor Robert George is a member of the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. He's been called America's most influential conservative Christian thinker, widely respected professor at Princeton. And Dr. George, I'm delighted to have you with us today. Could you tell us what led to that statement? Well, what finally got you to that point?
It's the atrocities being committed against Christians, Yazidis, and other members of religious minorities, and even members of the Sunni majority in Iraq by the so-called Islamic State. These are tyrants and murderers. They commit rape. They torture. Their victims include innocent women and children. They include elderly people. And they are driven by a kind of fanaticism that means they cannot be negotiated with. They must be stopped. And that's why our statement at IraqRescue.org calls for the destruction of ISIS, the Islamic State, as a fighting force. Nothing short of that will do. We mustn't kid ourselves, Pat. These people mean business. They tell us what they're going to do, and then they do it. We would be fools to stop short of anything but the destruction of this military force.
You know, there was a time that religious leaders were pacifists. They didn't concur with war. But what you're saying is that this group is so evil that it just has to be destroyed. And destroyed means they've got to be killed.
Well, that's what we need to do in order to protect innocent women, children, and other victims, Christians, Yazidis, Kurds, even members, as I say, of the Sunni majority. All of these people are being victimized, and victimized in a genocidal way, being wiped out as communities by these monsters. This is not a case of us Christians or us Americans against Islam. As your setup indicated, Islamic leaders throughout the Middle East are calling for the destruction of ISIS as well. We have no choice here. We must join across international bounds. The United States shouldn't do this alone, but in solidarity with other nations across the globe to stop this. This beheading, this horrible beheading, is just a single example of what goes on hundreds of times, Pat, every day in Iraq today. And they have no intention, ISIS, Islamic State, has no intention of stopping in Iraq. They mean to go on to Syria, throughout the Middle East, and they mean to carry out terrorist attacks in Europe and in the United States. These people do not idly threaten. When they threaten, as they have threatened, they make good on their threats. We must stop them now.
Well, I couldn't concur more. What do you think we're going to have to do? I mean, I think the president's a little reluctant to put so-called boots on the ground. We're looking to the Peshmerga to do the heavy lifting. Would you recommend more American troops, more deeper involvement to get this job done?
At this point, I don't believe that we do need American troops on the ground. The American public is very war-weary. We have not been happy about the way things have gone in Iraq. Many, many mistakes have been made. There's no point here trying to apportion blame between President Bush and President Obama or military leaders in Iraq. We need to be looking at what needs to be done now and looking to the future. I don't believe that we need American boots on the ground right now. I hope that we'll never need them. But we do need increased air support. We need airstrikes. The airstrikes defending and assisting the Kurds and the Sunni tribesmen and other fighters against ISIS have been useful. They've been very helpful. They need to be intensified. They need to be increased. We can also provide vital intelligence and strategic support to the Kurds and the others who are resisting ISIS. So let's do that. Let's join with the international community in doing that, and let's stop these people now. Let's hope it doesn't come to the need to send American troops. But if it does, we're going to have to stop them. We're going to have to fight them somewhere. Do we want to fight them in New York or in Washington, D.C., terrorist attacks, or should we fight them and defeat them in Iraq, joined with the international community? I say the latter.
Well, I totally concur. Dr. George, thank you so much for being with us. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be on the show.
Well, in other news, ladies and gentlemen, once again, Hamas has walked out of peace talks with Israel and then launched massive rocket attacks against major Israeli cities. Our John Wagi has that story from Jerusalem.
Israeli airstrikes boomed in the Gaza darkness, a response to at least 50 rockets Hamas fired into Israel, some of them directed at Israel's major population centers. Israel struck at least 30 targets in Gaza. One of them was the home of Hamas military leader Mohammed Deif, whose wife and child were reported killed. Hamas quit the ceasefire talks in Egypt, and one spokesman said hell will be unleashed on Israel. Jerusalem returned to a kind of cautionary normal after sirens sounded Tuesday, both here and in Tel Aviv. But polls show Israelis are in no mood for a diplomatic tap dance with Hamas. The latest Peace Index poll, taken before Hamas broke the most recent ceasefire, shows 58% of Israeli Jews want to defeat Hamas through military action. And a near unanimous 97% believe Israel's military is doing a good or excellent job. Israelis we talked to seemed resigned to the idea that the fight must continue, despite the heavy stress of rocket attacks.
I never thought in my life, at, 11 something or 12 o'clock last night, you know, just sitting on my bed, I would hear that sound. And you're hearing it now, and everyone is a part of it.
We try to do our best to get the situation to be good, and they don't want to do it.
Maybe something will change. Maybe the world eyes will be open, and they will see it's not normal to live like that. The evil, it's not us.
Hamas claims Israel's airstrikes were designed to thwart the Cairo talks.
We're warning the Israeli occupation from continuing this escalation and violating the ceasefire. We put the responsibility on Israel for this escalation and the implications of it.
Indirect talks between Israel and Hamas failed in part because Hamas wanted Israel to restore Palestinian access to Gaza by land, sea, and air, without giving up its huge store of weapons.
A seaport or an air port without commitment for demilitarization is like a duty-free for rocket and missiles.
As the fighting resumes, Israel is pursuing leads in its major bust of a Hamas plot in the West Bank. The security agency Shin Bet found a collection of terror cells headed by a ringleader in Turkey. They were getting ready to launch a coup against the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah and hit a number of Israeli targets, including the Temple Mount. John Wagi, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, John. You know, I've been thinking, ladies and gentlemen, what is Hamas' game plan? I mean, they don't have but so much weaponry. They've only got so many rockets. And yet they're firing these rockets willy-nilly at cities in Israel, and they're trying to provoke Israel, and Israel comes in and then destroys Gaza. So what are they being advantaged? Well, here's my thought on it. If you read the book of the prophet Ezekiel, the 38th chapter, he talks about a coalition coming against Israel in the latter days. That coalition, it consists of Russia, consists of Turkey, consists of Iran, and consists of Sudan. These are some. There may be some others in there too, but they are the major players. And there's going to be a vast army coming against Israel in a pincer movement. Now, could this be the trigger of that? Could something be moving Hamas toward that? They obviously they're trying to incite Hezbollah and Lebanon to come in. They're trying to incite the Syrians to come in. And they're obviously trying to incite the Iranians to come in. They obviously want a broader war, and they want to take down Israel. But could this be the precursor to the prophecy that you find in Ezekiel? And my answer is yes, I think it could be. This is the next big prophetic thing on the horizon, and it's very possible. It's setting up for that. Because Israel, we all acknowledge, has a right to defend itself, but sooner or later the nations are going to say, oh, but you're too extreme. It's not proportionate. You're not proportionate to the fact that they're sending some rockets and you're blowing up their buildings. It'll come down to that, and the press will spin it against Israel as sure as you're alive. Watch what happens. But right now, Egypt is on the side of Israel, and it's time that the United States State Department recognize we've got a friend in Sisi in Egypt, and we ought to support him. We've got a friend in the Peshmerga up in northern Iraq, and we ought to support them. And we've got a great friend in Israel, and we need to support them. And we should not support the Muslim Brotherhood. We should not support Hamas, and we should not support terrorists. And if we wake up to who the friends are and who the enemies are, the United States may be on the right side. But on this one, I think they're going to just hands off. We'll lead from behind. We won't get involved. And that's what the Bible says will happen.
An Iowa judge has ruled in favor of banning the use of video conferences to distribute pills that induce abortions. CBN News exposed this controversial practice called telemed abortion 3 years ago. Now the Des Moines Register reports a district judge ruled the state's Board of Medicine has the authority to regulate it. The current video conferencing system allows doctors in bigger cities to distribute abortion-inducing pills to women in rural clinics. The new rules require a doctor to be physically present with a woman when those drugs are provided. Planned Parenthood says it will appeal the decision. A new survey shows support is slipping for the Common Core, the new federal education standards. The study from Stanford's Hoover Institution found that just 40% of teachers back Common Core, compared to 76% a year ago. 40% of teachers now oppose Common Core, compared to just 12% last year. Support among the public has also fallen off as the standards have become increasingly polarized. 65% of the general public favored the standards last year. Today, it's down to 53%. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.